Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that every struggle in your life, every health problem, every moment of confusion and pain all comes from one terrible truth. And the worst part? It's not even your fault. You realize your shaky hands, your hard time breathing, your foggy thoughts, everything goes back to choices made before you were even born. Your parents, obsessed with keeping the family blood pure, have doomed you to a life of suffering. You find out your mother is also your cousin, your father is also your uncle, and your grandmother, she's also your great-aunt. The family tree doesn't spread like branches, it twists around itself like a choking vine. You're not the child of love, but of a cold plan. A plan to protect power and money no matter how many lives it ruined. This isn't some story. It was the real life of many women in history. Women trapped in a family curse they never asked for. Before we dive into these forgotten stories of suffering and survival, if you love learning the hidden truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I find it amazing that we're exploring these old stories together from different places in the world, connected by our shared curiosity. To understand these women's lives, we have to first understand the twisted thinking that caused their pain. For centuries, European royals believed marrying within their own blood would keep their divine right to rule safe. They thought their blue blood was different from commoners, more pure, more holy, blessed by God himself. This happened so often that by the 1500s, Europe's royal families had become one giant web of cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces, even brothers and sisters having children who would later rule empires. What they didn't know, or couldn't admit, was that they were creating a genetic disaster that would last for generations. The Habsburg family of Austria and Spain became masters at destroying themselves this way. Their motto could have been, "Let others fight wars, you, Austria, just marry." But these marriages weren't happy. They were careful but dangerous matches, creating some of the most tragic people in history. Our first story takes us to Vienna, 1634. Inside the shadowy halls of Hofburg Palace, a baby is born. Her name is Maria Anna of Austria. She will never know one single day without pain. Her body carries the Habsburg curse written in her very genes. From the very start, she knows she is different. Other children run and play, but she can barely walk. Her spine bends unnaturally, forcing her to hunch forward, making it hard to breathe. Her jaw sticks out so badly that she can hardly chew solid food. Servants have to cut her meals into tiny pieces, but even then, eating is a long struggle of careful bites and cautious swallowing. But her physical pain isn't the worst part. The worst part is knowing exactly why she suffers. She grows up surrounded by portraits of her ancestors, and in each painted face, she sees parts of her own deformities. An uncle with the same jaw, a grandmother with the same bent spine. She realizes she is just the latest victim of a long, cursed bloodline. The palace doctors, armed with bloodletting and prayers, can't help her. They whisper about the Habsburg curse, but never to her face. To her, they only say it's God's will or some mysterious illness. But everyone knows the truth, even if no one dares say it out loud. Maria Anna suffers because of her parents' and grandparents' obsession with pure blood. She spends her days in dark rooms with curtains drawn, hidden from the world. She throws herself into books, her sharp mind one of the few things her body didn't ruin. In those pages, she finds worlds where people marry for love, not bloodlines. Worlds where children aren't born already carrying the sins of their ancestors in their bodies. But reality never lets her escape for long. Court doctors come to examine her again and again, measuring the bend in her spine, the shape of her jaw, the weakness in her legs. She becomes less of a person and more of a medical case, living proof of what happens when bloodlines twist too tightly. Her loneliness hurts even more than her body. Suitors, who are also her cousins, turn away once they see her. Marriage talks start and end quickly. Even in a world where cousin marriage is common, her deformities are too much to ignore. At only 32 years old, Maria Anna dies. Her body finally gives up under the weight of too much genetic damage. Officially, her death is blamed on illnesses, but the real cause? A family that chose power over love. Bloodline purity over basic humanity.
From Austria, the story moves to Spain, to maybe the saddest figure of all, Joanna of Castile. History remembers her as Juana la Loca, or Joanna the Mad. She was born in 1479 to Isabella and Ferdinand, the same Catholic monarchs who kicked out the Jews and Muslims from Spain and sent Columbus across the ocean. On paper, Joanna looked destined for greatness, but her life turned into a nightmare, a warning about what happens when bloodlines are kept too pure. As a child, Joanna didn't look mad at all. She was smart, well-educated, and spoke several languages. But the seeds of her tragedy were already inside her genes. Her parents were cousins, just another link in that tangled European royal web. The cracks started showing after her marriage. She was given to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy. The marriage wasn't for love, it was a political deal. But instead of a happy union, it became a battlefield of emotions. Philip was unfaithful, cold, and manipulative. Joanna, in return, clung to him with desperate love, so strong that others called it madness. But was it really madness? Or just the natural reaction of a woman trapped in humiliation and betrayal? You see, Joanna had been raised to believe marriage was everything. Producing heirs wasn't just important, it was sacred. But when her marriage turned into pain and shame, her mind started to crack. Things only got worse when Philip died suddenly in 1506. Her grief consumed her. She refused to bury him. Instead, she traveled across Spain with his coffin, opening it again and again to kiss his rotting body. The image is shocking, yes, but it speaks to something deeper, her loneliness, her lack of real love and connection. Even death couldn't break her need for the one man who gave her attention, however cruel. Her father Ferdinand and later her son Charles V used this behavior to their advantage. They declared her mad and locked her away, using her illness as the perfect excuse to steal her power. For 46 years, yes, nearly half a century, Joanna lived in confinement at the convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas. Her conditions were terrible. Dark, cold rooms, little food, no real hygiene. Her attendants reported she sometimes went weeks without washing. She ripped her clothes, screamed for hours, and lived like a ghost. But here's the real question. Was Joanna truly insane, or was she destroyed by her situation? Modern historians believe much of her madness was political convenience. Her actions, as extreme as they were, can be explained as depression, trauma, and stress. And yes, genetics played a role too. Mental illness ran in her family. Depression and anxiety grew worse with each generation of inbreeding. Her great-grandmother had the same problems. Her daughter, Catherine, also suffered deep depression. The pattern was crystal clear. But in her time, no one saw patterns. They only saw a mad woman. Joanna died in 1555, still locked up, still labeled insane. Her death was barely noticed. In truth, she had already been erased long before, written off as a problem queen instead of remembered as a victim of power, politics, and poisoned bloodlines.
Our next story unfolds in the glittering Spanish court, where a little girl named Margaret Teresa carries the weight of an empire on her fragile shoulders. Born in 1651, she was the daughter of Philip IV of Spain and his niece, Mariana of Austria. Yes, you heard that right, his niece. By this point, the Habsburg family was so tangled that uncles marrying their own nieces was just normal. Margaret's childhood lives on through the famous paintings of Diego Velázquez, the royal artist. In those portraits, we see her dressed in heavy gowns, even as a little girl. Look closely, and the truth is there. Her jaw sticks out slightly, hinting at the Habsburg deformities that would get worse with age. Her eyes look distant, her posture stiff, signs of the health issues already written into her blood. But the saddest part of Margaret's story wasn't her body. It was that her life was never her own. From birth, every choice about her future was made by men who saw her as nothing more than a political tool. When she was still a toddler, she was already promised in marriage to her uncle, Leopold I, the Holy Roman Emperor. People celebrated this like some great political victory. Nobody thought about the child in the middle of it. By the time she was 15, she was forced into this marriage. Her husband Leopold was 26, old enough to be her father, and was literally her father's brother. For the royal court, it was a grand occasion. For Margaret, it was the end of her short childhood. From the very start, she was pressured to have children. Her health was weak, but that didn't matter. The dynasty had to continue. Her first child lived only a few months. The next pregnancy ended in miscarriage. Finally, she gave birth to a son, but even he was born carrying the same genetic problems. Each pregnancy drained Margaret's body. She grew thinner, weaker, and sicker. She suffered from constant illnesses, what today we'd call anemia, seizures, and breathing problems. The doctors wrote down her symptoms carefully, but none dared to say the truth. She was being destroyed by the family's obsession with pure blood. At just 21 years old, Margaret Teresa died. The official cause? Fever. But the reality? Her body had simply broken under the weight of too many pregnancies, too much inbreeding, too much pain. And while she was mourned across the empire, it wasn't for her life. People only grieved that she could no longer provide heirs. Now let's move to France, to the dazzling palace of Versailles. Here we meet another Habsburg princess, Anna of Austria, born in 1601, the daughter of Philip III of Spain and his niece, Mariana of Austria. Yes, yet another uncle-niece marriage. Anna grew up with the same problems many Habsburg children had. She developed slowly, struggled with speech, and carried the telltale jaw deformity. She also suffered from anxiety and sadness, what we'd now call depression. At 14, she was married off to Louis XIII of France to cement peace between the two nations. She was ripped from her home in Spain and thrown into a strange court with new customs, a new language, and a cold husband. Louis barely cared for her. He had his own problems, likely depression, and possibly feelings he couldn't admit in that era.
But as queen, Anna had one duty: to produce male heirs. That pressure crushed her. Her first pregnancies ended in miscarriages or stillbirths. Each loss broke her more. The doctors blamed her. They cut her, bled her, forced her through humiliating treatments. They examined her body over and over, searching for some female defect. No one dared admit the real cause, the centuries of inbreeding behind her suffering. Whispers started. People said she was cursed, that God hated the Spanish marriage, that France needed a new queen. Anna began hiding, too afraid to appear in public. She grew more anxious, more depressed. Her marriage with Louis became loveless, the two living mostly apart. She turned to faith for comfort, drowning in prayer and Catholic rituals. And then, after 23 years of marriage, the miracle happened. She gave birth to a healthy son, the future Louis XIV, the Sun King. 2 years later, she had another son, securing the dynasty. The pressure eased, but the damage was already done. Anna lived the rest of her life weak and sickly, suffering from what we'd now call chronic depression and anxiety. She died in 1666. History remembers her for giving France the Sun King, but her true story is one of isolation, humiliation, and endless suffering at the hands of a system that treated women like breeding machines.
Now we come to the most famous name of all, Marie Antoinette. People mostly remember her for the French Revolution, but her story is also tied deeply to the Habsburg curse of inbreeding. She was born in 1755, the daughter of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria and Francis I, the Holy Roman Emperor. Their marriage wasn't as close as uncle-niece, but the bloodlines had already been twisted for centuries. Marie carried the hidden weight of that history. When she arrived in France in 1770, at just 14 years old, she wasn't just a bride, she was a symbol of the alliance between Austria and France. Painters like Elizabeth Vigier-Lebrun painted her as beautiful, but even in those portraits you can see it, the slightly protruding lower lip, the Habsburg jaw. But Marie's real problems were hidden. Like many Habsburg women, she suffered from what doctors then called female troubles, terrible menstrual problems, miscarriages, and likely hormonal imbalances. Her husband, the future Louis XVI, also had his own struggles. He was awkward, slow, maybe even developmentally delayed. For 7 long years, their marriage wasn't consummated. The gossip was vicious. People whispered that she was cold, that he was impotent. Doctors poked and prodded her, searching for reasons why she couldn't conceive. What they didn't realize was that both husband and wife were victims of centuries of inbred genetics. When she finally became pregnant, her suffering didn't stop. Her first pregnancy brought endless morning sickness and crushing anxiety. Her daughter Marie-Thérèse was born healthy, but later pregnancies ended in miscarriages or dead infants. Each one tore her down more, body and soul. And then came the revolution. Marie's anxiety and depression, passed down through her bloodline and worsened by trauma, made it hard for her to handle the storm around her. Her impulsive decisions and emotional outbursts, traits maybe born of mental illness, were twisted by her enemies into proof she was heartless. The infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," which she likely never said, became a weapon used against her. Her breakdowns became more obvious as the revolution deepened. She would swing between bursts of energy and deep sadness, what today we'd call manic depression. When she was imprisoned, guards noticed her confusion, her blank stares, her retreat into silence under stress. In 1793, she was executed. But in her final hours, she showed courage and dignity. Her death ended not just her life, but centuries of Habsburg genetic legacy woven into France. But Marie was just one of many. In Spain, around the same time, entire generations of royal daughters, the Spanish infantas, were living proof of genetic collapse. They were the daughters and granddaughters of Charles II of Spain. The king so inbred his genetic coefficient was higher than if he had been born to a brother and sister. Charles II was impotent, epileptic, and possibly intellectually disabled, the ultimate symbol of centuries of cousin marriages. But his sisters and nieces suffered even more because they were expected to marry and bear children. Maria Margarita, born in 1561, struggled to speak until age 7. She had trouble walking and showed what today we'd call autism traits. Yet she was still considered valuable for her blood. Her sister, Maria Therese, had epilepsy, breathing problems, and a jaw so deformed she could only drink liquids. The royal palace in Madrid at this time was less like a palace and more like a hospital. Doctors and priests swarmed around, recording endless lists of illnesses, epilepsy, deformities, weak immune systems, depression. Still, these women were married off to cousins. Maria Margarita, for example, was forced to marry her cousin Leopold I, the same man who had once been married to Margaret Teresa. But she could barely understand her role as wife. Her body was too weak, her mind too delayed. The marriage was misery. These women grew up knowing their only worth was to have babies, yet their bodies betrayed them. Miscarriages, stillbirths, children born too deformed to live, all of it became their daily reality. They lived in fear of pregnancy, knowing it might kill them or produce another broken child. Their letters are heartbreaking. They write about babies who lived only days, about shame, about blaming themselves. They thought God was punishing them, never realizing it was their bloodline destroying them. And here's where science finally steps in. Today, we know what was happening. Inbreeding depression. When cousins marry over and over, harmful genes stop being hidden. They double up, causing deformities, mental illness, infertility, and weak immune systems. The famous Habsburg jaw is the most obvious sign, but it was just the surface. Modern studies show the Habsburgs suffered higher rates of epilepsy, depression, anxiety, and autoimmune diseases. Their fertility problems weren't just bad luck. It was genetics breaking down after centuries of forced cousin marriages. What makes this even more tragic is that everyone around them could see the problem. Doctors wrote endless notes about the illnesses. Courtiers whispered about the deformities. But no one stopped it. Politics and power were always more important. Even the Catholic Church gave out special permissions for these marriages, blessing unions that doomed entire generations. And sometimes the women themselves believed in it. Raised to think their royal blood was superior, they wanted to keep it pure, without realizing they were helping destroy their own children. It all came crashing down with Charles II of Spain. His death in 1700, childless and broken, ended the Spanish Habsburg line. His body was the final proof of the curse of inbreeding. After that, cousin marriages didn't stop completely, but they became less close. Slowly, people realized the risks. The suffering of these women had finally proven the cost was too high. Maria Anna, Joanna, Margaret Theresa, Anna of Austria, Marie Antoinette, the Infantas, they weren't just names in history. They were real women. Daughters, wives, mothers, women who deserved love, health, and freedom, but instead carried the punishment of centuries of bad choices. Their pain gave birth to something important: science. By studying their lives, by reading those endless medical reports, we learned about recessive genes, genetic diversity, and the importance of healthy bloodlines. Their suffering became part of the foundation of modern genetics. And maybe that's the one small light in this dark story. Their lives weren't wasted. Their struggles gave the world knowledge that has helped prevent tragedies like theirs from happening again. Still, when we think of them, we shouldn't just see genetic case studies. We should remember them as people. Young girls forced into marriages, women locked in dark rooms, mothers who lost child after child. At the very start, we imagined waking up to find your whole life cursed by decisions made before you were born. For the Habsburg women, that wasn't imagination. It was their reality. And yet, even in their darkest moments, they showed courage. Maria Anna escaped into books. Joanna clung fiercely to love. Margaret Theresa endured her suffering with quiet dignity. Anna turned to her faith. Marie Antoinette walked to her death with her head held high. Their stories remind us of one thing: real nobility isn't in bloodlines. It's in the human spirit. The strength to survive, even when the world conspires against you. The Habsburg curse has ended, but their voices still echo through history, telling us, remember us not as queens or princesses, but as human beings who deserved better. Learn from our pain, never repeat our mistakes.